Before starting any teaching or coaching session for the long jump, there are several things that must be adhered to in order to ensure safety and enjoyment for all athletes. These will include digging and raking the pit and checking it for dangerous objects such as rocks, ensuring that the pit is soft and full of sand so the athlete does not bottom out or hit hard surfaces once the top layer of sand has shifted, checking that the run-up is clear of obstacles and swept for maximum safety, informing all athletes that playing in the pit or running across the run-up is unacceptable, ensuring that the pit is clear of athletes, rakes or shovels before allowing the next athlete to have their attempt. These may all sound very simple things, but non-adherence to them can and has caused unnecessary injury. The long jump can be broken down into 4 separate phases that must be integrated into a single coordinated effort in order to maximise distance. The first is the run-up. The primary purpose of the run-up is to develop the horizontal velocity necessary for good jumping distance. Unlike a sprint, however, the acceleration is more controlled so the athlete can achieve the speed in a relaxed manner. The second phase is the very important takeoff. The takeoff will establish the flight trajectory or release angle of the athlete. Technique at this point will also largely determine how much horizontal velocity is maintained or lost into the jump. The third is the flight phase. This involves all of the athlete's actions through the air which prepare the body for landing. And the fourth phase is the landing itself. Although the distance the centre of gravity will travel is determined at takeoff, the landing distance will affect the measured distance in the event, as good technique will see the feet marking the sand in front of the body. Each of these phases is crucial to successful long jumping, although the run-up and takeoff technique will have the biggest bearing on results. The body of a long jumper can be considered like any object projected through the air, where distance is ultimately determined by release velocity and takeoff angle. Wind resistance is also a factor, but not one under the control of the athlete. The velocity at takeoff will be determined by the run-up speed and how much of it is maintained at takeoff, while the release angle is created entirely at takeoff. However, takeoff velocity and takeoff angle are inextricably interrelated. Normally, if a young athlete runs at maximum speed during the long jump run-up, they will collapse on the takeoff, and the resulting takeoff angle will be too low to allow for a good distance. This collapsing occurs because the athlete does not achieve the correct body position at takeoff, and also because of insufficient strength levels. It is very common to see this occurring at junior athletic carnivals. Conversely, an athlete may create an excessive takeoff angle, but in doing this they will lose too much of their run-up velocity, as a more vertical trajectory can only be generated by reducing horizontal speed. The optimum angle of takeoff for the long jump is in the order of 18 to 25 degrees. Therefore, in simple terms, the art of long jumping is about maximising the takeoff velocity while still maintaining a takeoff angle in the correct range. Although the landing skill also affects measured distance, perfecting the balance between velocity and takeoff angle is the major task facing the coach. Better jumpers are able to handle faster takeoff velocities without collapsing, thus ensuring a good performance. The factors that allow them to do this are good jumping technique and specific strength. The techniques to be used will be outlined in the coaching section. The specific strength, however, refers to what is generally called elastic strength or elasticity. It relates to the ability to absorb and rapidly rebound from a large force. Although genetic factors have a large influence over it, the elastic strength can also be developed with jumping and bounding type programs, often referred to as plyometric training. Plyometric training will help the long jump and takeoff in particular. Of course, takeoff velocity will be largely dependent on the speed capabilities of the athlete, and most top jumpers will train extensively and even compete in the sprint events. Many of the coaching methods outlined in the 100-metre section of this resource will also help the jumper to improve their runway speed. aim of the run-up is to get the athlete to the takeoff board at close to their top speed in the correct body position. Speed and consistency are the keys to a good run-up, and it is vital to any jumper that a high percentage of time should be spent in training with the coach developing this phase of the event. The first step for the beginner is to determine the takeoff foot. Most athletes will take off from the opposite foot to their kicking leg. The coach can also determine the takeoff foot by standing behind the athlete and pushing them in the back just hard enough to cause the athlete to fall forward. Whichever foot the athlete braces is usually the strongest leg and should become the takeoff leg. Once the takeoff foot has been determined, the athlete can begin to work on a run-up. As a guide, the beginner athlete should start with a run-up of 14 to 16 strides for competitions, and only increase as their level of competency increases. Starting with a forward lean, the jumper must accelerate smoothly and gradually to reach their top speed by the last stride. They should keep their body tall throughout the run-up and only lower their hips during the takeoff. Once consistency has been achieved in the run-up distance, it should be measured and recorded by the coach and athlete for future use. The athlete prepares for takeoff in the second last stride by slightly lowering the hips, but it is important that this is achieved with a minimum loss of speed. On the final stride, the takeoff foot should be planted on the ground flat-footed, slightly ahead of the hips and positioned in the midline of the body. In this way, the extended leg is planted almost like a pole vault, enabling the athlete to get sufficient vertical lift to produce a good jump. A flat foot on takeoff is important because jumping off the heels or toes will have a negative influence on the jump. The athlete then drives off the board and powerfully lifts the free knee to parallel, holding this position as the takeoff leg is extended. At the same time, the arm opposite the free leg is punched forcefully upwards. The head should be carried in a normal position, in line with the spine, and the eyes should be focused forward and slightly upward as the athlete moves into the flight phase. At the completion of the takeoff, the hips are well ahead of the takeoff foot. Once the athlete has left the ground and is in the air, nothing will change their flight trajectory. However, correct leg and arm movements during the flight will help balance and prepare the jumper for an effective landing position, thus maximising measured distance. There are 3 different techniques that may be used in the flight phase to improve the landing position. The first is the single stride technique, which is the most basic flight action. Here, the athlete maintains the takeoff position for as long as possible. After the takeoff is complete, the jumper lifts the legs in a toe-touching position. This is helpful for a beginner jumper as it allows them to move into the landing position early. However, the technique is not particularly good at countering the body's natural tendency to rotate forward, resulting in the feet touching the sand earlier than when using other flight techniques. The second is the hang technique, where at the completion of the takeoff, the jumper extends the arms and legs at a maximum distance from the hips. This position is held until just before landing, where the jumper snaps the legs forward into a landing position, which is assisted by throwing both the arms forward and down. This technique helps diminish the tendency to rotate forward. Athletes are encouraged to flex the knees at a 90-degree angle, which enables the feet to swing through the air faster when snapping into the landing position. The third is the hitch kick, which is most often seen in international competition where the athlete looks like they are running or cycling in the air. After takeoff, the free leg that has provided the drive steps down whilst the takeoff leg comes through into a second knee drive. The athlete waits for as long as possible before joining the free leg with the takeoff leg for the landing position to be established. The hitch kick requires a substantial amount of air time to be completed and is therefore not suited to jumpers at lower levels. When landing, the primary objective for the jumper is to get the heels as far away from the takeoff board as possible, without falling back in the landing pit. The jump is measured from the location in which the body contacts the sand closest to the takeoff point, which is why jumpers try and keep their feet as far away from their hips as possible. Upon landing, the athlete should hit the sand with the heels first and then collapse at the knees. They should then swing the hips to one side, which will leave the last mark in the sand as the athlete's feet and not their backside. Sweeping the arms forward during the landing phase helps the legs up and the body forward.
Long jumping is about jumping as far as possible, but it's also about trying to control the highest possible speed at takeoff. If you run in too fast and you're out of control and you're in the wrong position, you can collapse at takeoff, which means you're not going to get an optimal lift off the board out into the sand. So long jumping is about running in at the highest possible speed you can control without collapsing at the takeoff board, and obviously then getting the lift off the board out into the sand. Probably the most common technical faults for young jumpers, the most common one would be that getting no height at takeoff and going flat into the sand, and that's usually a result of them leaning too far forward in their run-up. Also as well, probably taking too long a run-up and coming in flat out and then slowing down at takeoff. And the one we mentioned before about the collapsing, so coming in slightly wrong positions and the knee buckling underneath the athlete at takeoff and then flat into the sand and no height as a result off the board. Yeah, flexibility is an interesting one. Certainly from my experience, it's very important for long jumpers and sprinters. Firstly, to get into positions to optimise your performance, be more powerful, you need to have good range of motion. So that can help your performance, as well as the prevention of injury side of things as well. But good habits would be that athletes would do regular flexibility training. From a technical point of view, I think good sprint technique down the runway is massive importance. So teaching the athletes how to run like a sprinter, the one difference is the athlete needs to probably run a little bit taller, so with the body a little bit more upright in preparation for takeoff. Then technique at takeoff is important as well, as we've mentioned before. Hip position and body being upright, so you can put the foot onto the takeoff board and let the hips come over the takeoff foot into the air. That then leads you into the flight phase and landing, where keeping the body upright to prepare for landing is crucial in getting the best landing in the sand and maximising your distance.